So thank you everybody on the line for joining us this afternoon. My name is Peter Stein and I'm the Managing Director of the Private Wealth Management Association, and we are glad that all of you can participate in our very first webinar at PWMA, which we are proud to be hosting together with the FinTech Association of Hong Kong. Today's discussion topic is remote working solutions and best practices. And needless to say, this is a subject that all of us are being forced to grapple with today in real time. And as you can see, some of us are in fact practicing working from home today on this webinar. There are technical and security challenges to managing access to needed data, challenges when staff can't comply with certain regulatory requirements, and challenges in how to supervise staff when nobody's actually working in the same place. So we're very fortunate today to have a good group of speakers to talk through some of these issues, share their perspectives, and take your questions. Let me now hand things over to Helene Lee, General Manager of the FinTech Association of Hong Kong, who will also moderate today's discussion and introduce our speakers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Peter. It's really a pleasure to be here moderating this really timely topic for everyone who has the time to join. The world is actually undergoing one of the largest working from home experiments. We have never seen this before, and hopefully the same situation that gave rise to this experiment will not occur again. But as we're going through it, we are very happy to have assembled quite a diverse panel to share their different experience with all of us here. We've got Florence, who is the COO for Asia Pacific and the Deputy Head for North Asia at Goldman Sachs. We have Medhy, who is the Head of FinTech at DBS and also the Head of the StartupXchange. And we also have Charlotte Robbins, who is a partner at Allen & Overy. So you have it all, the regulatory perspectives, the finance perspectives, and also the technology perspectives that would enable a successful BCP or remote working. So let's start perhaps with ladies first. Let's move over to Florence. Would you care to share with us some of the BCP plans you are implementing now? What are some of the challenges and how you are addressing that?
Sure. Thank you, Helene. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining this first webinar of PWMA. I guess just a few things to start. I guess from a BCP perspective, the framework is either you in your business, you figure out who are your critical function colleagues, and then from then on, you decide whether these critical function colleagues, whether they be work from a far site, aka BCP site, or in your primary locations, where again, different firms have different methods, but some firms might decide to, within their primary locations, critical staff be rotated between the office and work from home. The overarching goal here is to create social distancing. Which is what in the world that this be one of the critical factors in reducing the amount of transmissions in the community. Once you've gotten there, the rest becomes that probably is the easiest part in that sense. The rest is implementation, which is the hardest piece in my little experience. I think it can be broken down into a number of areas. The first one being, how do you stay engaged once you get to either you're in a far site, or whether you're working in the office as critical staff, or whether you're working from home as non-critical staff. How do you stay engaged with clients and your colleagues? And this is just, again, you all have probably, some of you have worked from home for a few days now, or maybe more than that. It's my fourth day working from home full time. And, I find it to be extremely, in a sense, work equals to home and home equals to work, which is terrible because there's no more sort of walking out to lunch or, saying, chit-chatting with your colleagues. It's all about your computer in front of you or going to the fridge to eat, which is a terrible, terrible outcome for all of us ladies. So how do you stay connected? How do you sort of, in that 8 or 10 hours a day, how do you maintain that connectivity? I mean, obviously technology like Zoom helps, but from our own little experience, we think that setting things in a making regular habits here is critical, i.e. setting up mandatory meetings with all your salespeople, setting up team meetings regularly, just put in a time on your calendar so that people can dial in through Zoom or dial in, having regular webinar with your clients on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis, depending on the firm and the clientele and the topics. These are critical in terms of just making sure that we remember to stay connected, because it's very easy sometimes when you resort to home working, you've forgotten that there are, a lot of people elsewhere that you need to stay communicated with, and setting that habit of diarizing your, meetings will help a lot. By the way, in this environment, our clients want to hear more from us, not less from us. So in that sense, increasing the amount of information flow to your clients and to your colleagues is paramount. It's more important than any other times in our experience. Managing expectations is also critical, and that goes internally within your staff, with your staff, as well as with your clients. Managing them that you're working from home. There might be technology issues from time to time. Just setting expectations, level playing the expectations is critical to not get anybody upset. For me, for instance, I'm not any tech expert here, so I also tell my boss, this mandatory meeting that you set up, you may need to be the host, that's fine, but I will be a little slow because, I'm not the best at managing my own technology. Again, in the last few days, in the last couple of weeks, as we go through the BCP for different offices in the region, particularly in China, where we have onshore offices pretty much on a lockdown mode in the last 6 weeks, we have come to a realization that engagement is a form of resiliency, i.e., keeping ourselves engaged is one way to keep ourselves, increase our resiliency in overall in this fairly challenging and difficult environment. Notwithstanding just the virus itself, the market itself has made it even more difficult with all the volatilities, all the margin call that I'm sure you all have faced, all the difficult client conversations. It's been a difficult period. Stay engaged is one way to help you build up your resiliency. Secondly, I would focus on staying on top of technology, which I'm sure the other panel speakers will focus on. But simple things like, checking your home setup, what is your Wi-Fi capacity. I've just done that last week. I realized that my Wi-Fi was only like 85 megabytes, less than 100 megabytes, and that's really slowing things down. So I've gone on and upgraded my Wi-Fi and things like that. Do you have a monitor that works? Some people don't even have a landline. Can the firm provide landlines? Otherwise, we'll be speaking on the mobile phones all the time, which is not the healthiest thing. And things like that. We just need to, work through sort of the firm's approach and sort of watch, look at your home situations as to how we can improve your little home office. And then the next one I've been focusing on would be the operational flow. And it's, again, another challenging moment. We take for granted in the past that, we can send a letter, we can print it, we can sign the piece of paper and then scan it and send it to a client. The client can send you a document with signature, we can scan it into our systems, and it's all fine. Now with this, everybody work from home. These little things that in the past we take for granted are getting difficult. So e-signatures being explored, scanning on the client side, the ability to scan their own signed pages, and then send the scanned documents back to the firms have been explored. I think all these will help ease most of us in operating. Continue to basically operate is what BCP means, is, we continue to provide business services to our clients, to our colleagues, despite a very different environment. And then lastly, and I'll stop in a minute, I think emotionally staying nimble and balanced is the key. Things are changing so fast. The law is changing every day. The government issue new guidance every day. The firm is thinking of, changing the BCP plan every day, by the way. I mean, now we're thinking about, should critical staff be provisioned with all equipment so that they can work from home, i.e. nobody goes to the office. should one day, the government is thinking of implementing a lockdown in the community, which we have seen in other parts of the world. So it is evolving. We just have to set our mindset to be, change is the constant. And therefore we be able to accept those changes and adapt to those changes better than we will be otherwise if we don't expect it to happen. So Helena, I'll just stop for a minute for any comments you may have.
Sure. Thank you so much, Florence. Now, that's very precious kind of takeaway, because I think you covered both the emotional side, the practical side, as well as the technology side. If I may, at this point, before looping in our legal experts, Medhy, how about yourself from, straddling both the technology side and also running the trying to implement the BCP for DBS? What are some of the takeaways that might be common or different from what Florence just shared?
Hi everyone, my name is Medhy. Thanks for having me here today, and thank you for your question, Hélène. So I'm working at DBS, and just a quick word on my background. My background was between banking and startups. So I work for a couple of private banking, and I work also for a couple of startups. So I had a double culture of working on a pretty traditional industry and working with the new technologies. So one of the things that is really interesting at DBS is, since the first day of the coronavirus and just after Chinese New Year, we had already implemented way to work from home. So we were on crash to work from home. So depending on the team, if you need to use specific tools that are difficult to use from home, but you can just only use them at the office. The team, we have kind of team A, team B, team C, and try to do a rotation between the different offices that we have. So we have an offices for business continuity plan. We have also different offices where we are assigned. So for example, for myself, today I'm working from home, but usually I'm working from the headquarters in the center. In Central, but we have another one in the Quarry Bay, one on Quantum Digital, the DG Hub. So it's where the team can work, but we need to stick to one office, or we need to stick to home. So for the team like my team, we can work from home because we don't have to use specific tools, and we are not on the production side. We are more on the project management side, review of innovation and managing different projects. So we can do all the calls, all the meetings, not physically, but directly through different software. And I have prepared a presentation that I can share later on that webinar. So for this team, it's quite easy. For the other one, it will be a split of teams, and the objective is not to together. So if the team A is on the office, they don't need to meet the people from the team B. So we have a plan that we need to follow. Every morning we have a call on the BCM at 9 or 10, depending on the week and the different updates, where we have a sharing session with the business continuity plan team. We have also a couple of updates every day by emails, and also we share some tips. So HR or different teams, we share a couple of tips with the team to how to stay efficient and proactive, how to create that kind of routine that Florence just discussed before, and how to maintain a good health, mental health, because working from home can be sometimes really challenging for some people. For me, for example, it's challenging because I cannot speak with anyone, and staying in my home, I can work from 8 to 10 without seeing like the daylight because I'm so focused on my project. And you take a look at the clock and you're like, oh shit, it's already 10 p.m. What have I done today? Because you are engaged on many calls with everyone. You want to follow up. You need to create action plan. So it's kind of things that we try to avoid to work continually and without stop. So we have a couple of best practices that I can share later on during that webinar. But maybe I can give you back the mic, Eileen, and we can go to the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you so much, Medhy. I think we've heard from Florence and also Medhy the different ways in which banks have been trying to tackle this. And I think one of the challenges, as Florence quite rightly pointed out, is that BCP is a fluid thing. The regulations change. There are different issues from cybersecurity to personal data privacy. So I'd like to pose some of these questions and ask for the input from Charlotte. If you could share with us some of from a compliance and regulatory angle, what are some of the things we need to be mindful of in working out the BCP, Charlotte?
Thank you, Helen, and thank you to both PWMA and FinTech Association for inviting me to participate in this webinar. I'd also like to firstly sort of kick off and support what has been said before about the sort of rapidly changing environment that we're living in. And particularly sort of everything that I'm saying, has the backdrop of that there are many moving pieces and they're changing, as Florence and Helen have said, very, very rapidly with new regulatory announcements coming out relatively frequently, not only domestically, but also at an international level, and of course from governments with announcements around new legislative change for a variety of reasons, and in some cases because legislation is not supportive of the extent to which remote working is having to be undertaken. And I'll come on to that. But perhaps just to sort of start off with some of the regulatory considerations, I think it's also extremely important to just remember that despite the fact that we're all remote working at an unprecedented level, and at, I think it's fair to say, at a relative time of stress, regulation doesn't simply fall away. It needs to be complied with, and the risks need to be managed, and regulatory reporting needs to be adhered to. Consequently, what we've been finding is regulated firms have needed to consider not only their additional compliance data, ordinary risk, but also, of course, the unusual risks being thrown up by remote working. Remote working can improve segregation where that's required for certain roles, but it can also weaken the ability to supervise staff, protect confidential information, or indeed maintenance of records. A very good example of a day-to-day issue which was thrown up as potentially being challenged quite early on in the process, certainly in Hong Kong, was the obligation to record client orders. And that's something that we've been faced with for many years, and many of you will be familiar with paragraph 3.9 of the Code of Conduct. But through the PWMA, who approached both the HKMA and the SFC, the issues around voice recording and bank staff are paying instructions outside of the usual place of work. These were discussed, and PWMA put forward some proposals which the HKMA and the SFC accepted, and I think that the PWMA have circulated those to the members, and the means by which orders can be taken, and then there's a callback immediately to telephone recording systems to record the receipt and the order details. It also was an opportunity for the SFC to reinforce the instant messaging rules and requirements they came out with a couple of years ago, and their amenability to the different needs of intermediaries. I think on this point, in terms of dialogue with the regulator, there are clearly going to be day-to-day regulatory issues that need to be complied with, but that the regulator is showing itself to be amenable to discussion. And therefore, related to that, and I think an important part of the overall BCP is the importance of having a good regulatory engagement strategy, both in terms of finding solutions to regulatory requirements where in certain circumstances, at worst, it's not achievable, but at best challenging, but also having very good lines of communication on an ongoing basis, as well as in the event of an issue arising. I'd also like to focus on another key area, which is imperative for best practice, is the need to protect confidential information when working remotely. As has been said before, remote working is not new, but the scale at which it's been employed at the moment is unprecedented. And as a result, quite often for many of us, the conditions are not what they might have been on a more ad hoc or less frequent basis. What we're finding from our clients is that the best practice is requiring firms to reiterate their relevant policies around dealing with inside information and confidential information, to stress upon employees the importance and to highlight areas of particular risk arising out of what might be their current situations. For example, the risk of taking calls in a co-occupied room or using a shared printer. There are mitigation tools which are often brought about through technology. So, for example, controls that block printing when working remotely, and firms are looking to employ that. Another point about the BCP, and Florence and Hélène have both referred to Medhy to its evolving nature. It's important to reinforce the pertinent policies, not just around inside information and confidentiality policies, but also policies generally, and also where important changes to policies are made as a result of either situations encountered. And bearing in mind, BCP policies should be continually stressed and tested and adapted as a result of those tests, but also as a result of regulatory or legal change, and then effectively communicated. Just in terms of effective communication, and I think Florence has touched on that. There's use of telephones, WebExes, Zoom, etc. But one of the things that certainly we're finding with some clients is making sure that there isn't communication overload. It's important to know which messages are priority messages and how best they should be conveyed, and not overwhelming staff with a barrage of information. Things will get missed, and that's something that we're finding our clients are having, and ourselves as we're having to grapple with and ensure that the messaging is being effective. Because if things are missed and regulatory issues arise, then the firm needs to be answerable, or will find themselves answerable to the SSC or the HKMA. In all of this, there's a significant role for management, and they not only have to be on top of the policies and the changes that are happening, but also maintaining supervision. And as we all know, the regulators over a number of years now have been very focused on culture, conduct, and governance. And I think this is never more important at a time like this, when we can't sort of physically see one another, keep an eye on one another. And so we're seeing that our clients have sort of under some strain as to how to properly supervise their staff as they work remotely. Again, checking conversations, phone calls over VC or otherwise, as well as through technology, increased monitoring of records is the way that we're seeing financial institutions operate. It does mean that also management has to be more proactive in reaching out. They also need to ensure that people abide by escalation procedures. These are enforced, and teams should be reminded of this just because they're outside of the office. Again, the normal procedures, albeit perhaps addressed in a slightly abnormal way, i.e. different means of communication, should be reinforced, stressed, and followed. Without wanting to turn this into a session on management responsibility, I would like to make an observation, however. There's a lot about management and the responsibility of management, but I do think at a time like this, and we're seeing firms focus on it more and more, is actually the role of those beneath senior management, and potentially even beneath that, depending on how many layers there are, and the importance of them to the more junior team members. Usually we find that junior team members perhaps don't interact with senior team members, and they're probably less likely to do so when we're working remotely. Senior management will therefore rely on middle team members to ensure that the sort of good lines of communication, and not only good compliance, but also good morale and well-being. You'll have heard the phrase "moved from the middle," and I think a good move from the middle is critical at these times, and should be encouraged. Before I pause, I'll just touch on data protection. As Hélène has mentioned, remote work increases the chance of data leakages. We've probably seen and heard and read in the press about hackers and scammers taking advantage of the situation. Firms are having to update increase their testing and surveillance against the policy, and again, amending it and reiterating it as necessary. The other area which is related to management is we're also seeing the importance, and clients spending a lot of time ensuring that there is effective oversight over their outsourced data providers, and these relationships should be tested and good lines of communication with such providers. With that, I'll pause, Helene, and if you've got any questions, please let me know.
Sure, great. Thank you so much, Charlotte.
So there is some, so to stay efficient and proactive on your how to manage agenda and still continue to discuss with the teams, but also with the clients, we have a couple of tips sent every, I want to say every week, but regularly by some teams of DBS to how use remote working tools and also some tips for extra tools. So we have kind of support to have, you know, like receiving kind of speakers, to have a better sound and quality, and also more convenience for video conferences that we can subscribe to, and also to ask the bank to sponsor those kind of tools. So one of the speakers that we use a lot is the Jabra one here. This one you can put, you can log it to your computer. It's Bluetooth. You can log into your phone. You can control the volume. In terms of remote work tools that we use, and to be more efficient and proficient, for video and audio meetings, you can use a couple of tools like Zoom, Cisco WebEx, Skype, Google Meet. Before it was Hangouts, or if you go to Google, it's still Google Hangouts Meet, or GoToMeeting. So right now, today, we are using Zoom. So I think you are more familiar with this one, or Cisco WebEx for companies, or Skype for families. In terms of collaboration, we use a lot Microsoft Teams and Slack. They are a kind of competitors, but as we are under Microsoft Office, Microsoft Teams become one of the tools that we use a lot at DBS, but also my previous job. And my job is mostly to work with startups. So by using Microsoft Teams, we can also share documents with the startups. So they come on the chat, we can open the chat to everyone. It's quite easy to work with them. And when you update a document, you also update it on the cloud. So people can come back on the document later on. It's quite interesting. Slack is more used by startups, and I didn't use Slack, but it's still the same kind of collaboration tools for teams. After this, you have emails like Outlook, Gmail, and also interface on Samsung or your iPhone. If you need to do some to-do list or notes, what is quite interesting is to use Evernote, Google Keep, OneNote. You have also Microsoft To Do and Google Task. So those tasks are quite similar, and you can share the note that you have or the to-do list that you have. It goes directly on OneDrive. You have also Google Drive. It's the same thing for Google Suite, sorry. And also you have the different Dropbox or cloud application. And to stay really proactive, what I can recommend to you is to use also your agenda on Outlook, on Apple or Google Calendar to keep a good tracking of your meetings and what are your deadlines. So you need to be a bit more proactive on how you schedule everything, but it can be interesting.
So Florence, the question is, how do you actually balance, you know, the all the information clutter out there and the constant fluidity communicate with your employees? How are you addressing some of these challenges?
Yeah, it's a good question. The firm sends out many emails every day. Our president himself sends out an auto message every other 3 days to try to stay connected. So in a way, it is getting a lot of information in your mailbox. And I think the way to really help with overflow of information is to help your employees to filter those information, i.e., for instance, in our case, we have a mandatory weekly meeting with everybody, and that's where we, the leadership, will cascade the most important information or sharing from the firm, whether it be related to a policy or regulatory or clients, so that we put it all together and help the employees digest, the most important pieces of information instead of reading through many, many different emails or symphony chats or, voicemails and videos. So we've decided that we just summarize the key points for them and host a meeting every week to go through them in a half an hour, 45-minute format. That we found to be the most effective. Because the policy change every day. I mean, our wellness teams, our BCP teams' policies change every day in terms of what the firm requires in terms of, for instance, quarantine. nobody can catch up to those. So that's why we're there to help summarize the information.
Yeah, I think that helps to address a lot of the some of the overhanging questions we have around this. Actually, we do have a question, which is more for Charlotte and Medhy. There's a question from the audience that they've been using Adobe Scan and DocuSign for the client's agreement and order, and other order acknowledgement, the signatories. Is that legally in compliant with the current Hong Kong MA and SFC Code of Conduct?
Perhaps I can quickly sort of, thank you, Helen. I think it rather depends on actually the nature of what's the communication and what's in the communication. But safe to say that certainly when you look at the electronic transactions ordinance, that does permit certain sort of e-signatories and e-communications. Generally speaking, there are some exclusions around deeds and so forth, but as long as it's sort of reliable and agreed method of signing, or agreed method signing by the recipient of the communication. So there is certainly, there is at law some flexibility here. I would say that on this particular topic, this is something that has really come to the fore in the last week or so, and not just in Hong Kong, but globally. And whilst we've all worked remotely from time to time, it's never, as we've said before, been at such a scale. And so these sort of practical challenges, including, for example, when you've got a deed as well, what about witnessing physical presences and so forth? So these practical challenges are being thrown up. And I said there's a lot of conversations with clients and amongst other advisors as to the best practice within the confines of the law, also looking to other jurisdictions. So Hong Kong is a common law jurisdiction, and so looking to sort of some helpful guidance from the UK, and also how Singapore are even doing it. But certainly, again, it depends on what the communication is in terms of where the regulator would come out, and indeed as a matter of law. But as a general principle, as long as it's sort of not a deed or one of the excluded documents, electronic communication, if agreed between the parties, is generally sufficient, but it could depend.
Right, that's great. Thank you so much, Charlotte. There is another question actually riding on that validity of electronic signatures, and that is, are the electronic signatures on deeds enforceable by law?
That is, if you look to the UK, there is some very, very recent case law in the UK which would suggest yes. I think it's open to debate from a Hong Kong standpoint, but of course we do look to the UK law. So the question's all around, largely, I think, to the extent that what is the deed, and what does it go to, and what are the parties' views, and particularly around views around not being able to physically witness. So I think it's something, I'm afraid I hesitate to give a blanket answer because it is an area of ambiguity. But whoever the questioner is, I'm very happy to speak to them separately. But on some practical points, just on this topic, if I have a moment, these are one of the things that, for example, around that goes to sort of deal management. And one of the things that we're seeing at the moment is the importance of thinking about these issues on the context of a deal. And, deals, I'm not a transactional lawyer, but, quite often the signing gets sort of dealt with. It's just a formality you need to get done, where people are having to think now in advance. Also, practical things like, have we got enough signatories? So actually we might only have a couple of signatories. Should we have more? Because then perhaps we might have a chance of having physical signing. So there are a number of things that have been thrown up, and the organisation around sort of signing of documents is absolutely paramount, needs to be thought about as early as possible. But the question of deeds is still a tricky issue, needs to be looked at on in the context and the parties. The other thing I suppose I should say is, as well, does something have to be done by a deed? We're also seeing people looking at, there may be some arrangements where actually actually, could this be done through a contract and not a deed? But of course, that doesn't work in every case.
Right. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Medhy, in terms of the digital tools that you are developing and working on with your team, is there anything you want to add to this? In answer to some of these questions that was raised.
One of the tools that I'm working with the present manager right now, and we try to find a solution. So it's a bit different from the question about signing, but I think it's quite interesting. It's when you start to do a video conference like right now with Zoom or with another tool, how the technology can help you to identify if the client in front of you is really the client that you want to discuss with, and you can validate the different options of ordering. So we are looking at startups across the world to see if there is some tools we can link to a Zoom, Skype, or other access software, to also identify via different workflow processes the identity of the client in front of us. So it's something that we are trying to do. It's not easy to find a solution like this one, but I think because of the coronavirus situation right now, it's something that came to the mind of a couple of relationship managers.
Right. Actually, turning to Florence, I think you also mentioned a little bit earlier on in some of the BCPs, how do you actually engage with teams? How do you, enable them to do these various, maybe more transactional tasks? Is there something you would like to add to this? Because this is obviously something that is quite top of mind for a lot of our participants today who might be working for different banks or, different financial institutions. Florence?
Yeah, sure. From a technology perspective, obviously, whilst the regulator may have some relax on the tape, but we have been providing, for instance, voice recording function using the phones at home, which we provide. So it allows the sales teams to continue to transact with the client whilst working from home, and they will be able to enter the orders from their remote login into our systems. The difficult part has always been, as in the regular times, people work in teams and they might be talking to the person sitting next to them in working the order. So this, obviously, with everybody dispersed out in their respective homes, will make it really difficult. And sometimes we encourage people to have a live Zoom, like what we're doing, a team of 3 people where they're trading quite a bit and sort of shouting over the Zoom screen, quote unquote screen, saying, this is done, or can you work on that order, and things like that. So that has helped a lot because obviously, we no longer have the physical presence where we can shout at each other and saying, hey, where are we on that? So Zoom or other, video conferencing tools have been helpful. Subject to, obviously, again, go back to the technology point of the home setup. Is your Wi-Fi stable? I mean, something that we all struggle with, and we need to sort of sort it out over time with your provider.
Right. I think that's great. Medhy, I'm sorry, over to you again. I think you were in the middle of some of the tools that you were sharing. So would you like to continue on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think I was here. And I mentioned that you have different tools for different categories, so you have the notes and to-do list with different software and tools that you have Evernote, Google Keep, OneNote, Microsoft To Do, and Task. Share also about sharing files and agenda. So I mentioned that one of the things is quite interesting is all the software from Microsoft Suite or Google Suite are linked to each other. So if you use one, it's still on your drive, or it can be shared with another team, and you can have it on your computer, you can have it on maybe on your TV, or you can have it on your phone or iPad as well. And it's quite easy to come back where you were, if you were at work, in a cafe, or maybe at the office, and come back to the same document and still share it with different teams. For myself, I use a lot OneDrive by Microsoft because I have the entire suite of Microsoft. Let me see if I'm still here. Okay, that's good. On my computer, and I can always share this with the teams that we have internally in DBS, but also with the startup I work with. So it's quite interesting for us. Next slide will be about data security issues. So it's something that we must be aware. You're gonna have many ways to have leak via your emails or the tools that you use. So how to be more cautious about it. So you can reduce security on mobile device and other device by adding new tools or new application to help you to protect your data. And when you work remotely, you may use your personal device. So try to don't access always on public Wi-Fi for your different tools. And one of the things we see more and more, and we at DBS we have some of trainings like this. It's on a phishing attack. So you will receive an email saying you have a new document on Dropbox or you have a new document on Google Drive or other things. Check always the name of the sender. If you are not aware about it, you may have an issue. And sometimes the email will showcase the name of Dropbox or Microsoft, for example. But when you click on that name, you will have a name with figures and letters, super long, at another address, and it's nothing related to Microsoft or Dropbox. So phishing is like something of the most common attack that we can all have. You can also manage and track company assets on the cloud. So try always to keep it between the people of the company if you share a link, and don't try to send it independently to different people, because you will have back and forth message among other employees, but also sometimes with external parties. And do not forget about the minimum security practices that you can have out of the office. Don't send documents to your personal emails. Try to always connect with your computer to have access to your company emails. Try to send a document via a kind of encryption. So you zip it and you add a password. Send the email first with the attached document first, and send a second email after or by WhatsApp the password to open the document. This will protect your confidential information.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, please, Elaine, you can go ahead.
No, sorry. Because we got actually two very interesting questions coming in for each of our panelists. So if I could just stop Medhy there.
Sure.
One question is, and I think it's for all of the three panelists here. What do you think is missing, and what would make a difference when you work remotely? Florence?
I think the missing part is the engagement, because I feel it's like there is a hole somewhere. I mean, even though I do Zoom with my colleagues, but it's not the same as seeing them. They come into my office, discuss issues and things like that. So I think what will make a difference is, people need to, on one hand, management, senior personnel, we ought to reach out, but also encourage everybody in the business to reach out, because it is a mutual thing. Like, I can reach out as many times I want, but it's not the same as, the other person also reach out to me for a question, a problem, or just chit-chatting. Even just chit-chatting would be great, I think. So I think that is missing today, because it's awfully boring at home, despite very busy, from working till 9 till Medhy, you made a point, to 10 p.m. But it's emotionally, it's quite dry.
Indeed. Charlotte, how about from your perspective?
Thank you. I mean, I don't know whether to answer this from a personal perspective. I would agree with Florence. It's that sort of interaction with people, and I think that not having it physically, it's quite interesting that we're suddenly realizing how much we rely on it, and whether it was a comfort or however you wish to describe it. And so what would make a difference? Well, perhaps being able to go back into the office would make a difference, but we can't do that, and it's not in our best interest or Hong Kong's best interests to do that. So I think it's really what's going to make a difference is time. I mean, we've set up some WhatsApp groups amongst me and my team. We share photographs. It's not the same, but again, it's having that, if I can use that phrase, that banter that perhaps is missing. So between me and my team, we're doing that, and I think just sort of again with other colleagues, having that line of communication, the more informal lines of communication, perhaps from a work perspective, and coming at it from a regulatory practitioner, and I'm suffering in the same way as the banks, and particularly those members of PWMA who are in multiple jurisdictions, is trying to keep on top of everything. And I think that that's not a missing part, but that's what's going to make a difference to help with that. And I think that as time goes on, and certainly as a law firm with our website that we've got on COVID-19, trying to make it easier for both ourselves, but also for financial institutions. So hopefully in time we'll have a central resource where we can get the information, because I recognise it's a massive challenge. And I think that's partly why we're all being inundated with information, because it's coming from so many different sources. So as I say, from a sort of professional work perspective, it's hopefully finding that solution was a sort of some form of central database that you can search and filter and get what you need, not just on a domestic basis, but internationally.
Yeah, that's so true. Medhy, how about from your side? What is missing, and what would make a difference in remote working?
Okay, I can share again my screen if you want, because I prepared the answers before.
Sure.
So it's a couple of things that we have seen with my team, and let me up. So one of the things is what I just experienced with you 10 minutes ago, technical issue. So weak Wi-Fi or problem issue with my VPN. Sometimes it happens during like calls and we are disconnected. So it's a bit an order for us to keep track and don't lose the focus on the meeting, I think. No traditional work setting. So right now I'm doing that call from my sofa, my living room, but because I just changed flat, so I'm not yet settled in yet. So I prefer to work on a desk and have access to big screen and not just on your computer. The thing that we discussed all together just before, no strict schedule. So sometimes you can start to have call at 8 in the morning, and you will have a late call after 8 p.m. or so. So don't know what is the limit between your personal life and working life, because you want to deliver and you have to come back with different teams, and sometimes you cannot just have a chit chat for 5-10 minutes face to face with someone, and you need to find a way to catch up with that person during the day with his agenda if it's busy. For me, it's definitely loneliness. I don't like to be alone. Right now, I have one of my colleagues with me because we're working on the project, but I mean, it's really important to see people around you, just to see people working, and also discuss about, when you go for coffee, for a quick break to catch up with someone you didn't have time to catch up with. And another thing is difficult to create team building sessions. So you don't have lunch, you don't have after work, you don't have coffee, you don't have the conversation I mentioned before. And yeah, so back to no strict schedules, you have also difficulty to find a work-life balance. I mentioned it before as well. So it's 6 items I saw.
Great, thank you so much, Medhy. Maybe there's a lot of good interaction. If I may just close the session out with one last takeaway from each of the panelists. What is the one biggest challenge you have, and how do you address it in this period? Florence?
Sure. My biggest challenge is very personal. You sit here all day at home without the ability to walk to outside and chit chat, walk a different floor. My back becomes really sore. And how did I overcome it? I bought a yoga mat and just do a 15-minute exercise each day because the gym is even closed. So that's been my biggest challenge.
Thank you. Charlotte?
On a personal, my biggest challenge is, I probably shouldn't admit this, but is dealing with my own IT and having to do everything for myself. I'm not the most IT savvy, so I'm very fast becoming so. Despite the fact that I'm not on Zoom today, but thanks to Florence, I now know how slow my Wi-Fi is, and I'll be sorting that out at the weekend. But it is that technology side is one of my sort of personal biggest challenges. I think from a professional perspective, again, it's not being able to meet with people. We certainly in the regulatory space, we spend a lot of time dealing with clients and actually meeting with clients, and so that is a big challenge in adapting the way we're interacting with our clients. But hopefully, we're managing to get better at that.
Absolutely, Charlotte. And I think, it forces everybody to be more entrepreneurial. You have to suddenly do a lot of things that probably in an office environment, you've got teams there to support you. How about Medhy? What are some of the biggest challenge, the one biggest challenge that you have addressed?
Yeah, it's run some workshops or run some design thinking session. Normally you need to be in a group in the same room, but here it's quite difficult to do it because people are not, in the same room, and with computer it's quite hard to interact with everyone and asking them to see what they can draw on the paper, for example. So it's one of the things. And also I want to say, when you work on a really important deck or presentation or research, sometimes it's good to gather with other colleagues and see where we are exactly. And to do better collaboration is quite hard sometimes as well, because you are missing that kind of physical touch that you can have when you are all in the same meeting room.
Yes, absolutely. Now, on that note, I think our webinar this time has come to a close. This will not be the only webinar we're doing. We want to thank very much everyone for participating. Want to thank our 3 panelists for their expert sharing, and also, of course, to thank PWMA, Peter, Matthew, and team for doing it together with us. On behalf of the FinTech Association of Hong Kong, I wish everybody to stay safe, stay healthy, and find your way to work through this biggest experiment that we are all in together. Hope this has been somewhat helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.